Dayenu, just that word, right, brings us right into Pesach, yeah? Right away we can see ourselves and feel ourselves, for many of us, at the Seder. I could see Jory sitting around at her Seder going, Dayenu, or maybe Tamar, or maybe Robin or Howard. All of you can hear that prominent musical meme that brings us to the liberation feast that is known as the Seder. Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. This homage to sufficiency, to enough. The word die means enough. It would have been die, enough. And then the litany of gratitudes that are not just platitudes, the gratitudes of it would have been enough. But of course, miraculously, the story of that song and that prayer in the Seder liturgy, which has become canonical for so many of us. The beauty of it is, of course, that it doesn't end after the first verse, because it wouldn't have been enough, right? It would have been enough, but it wasn't enough. And each and every year, I'm sure I'm not alone, somebody at the Seder table will not only sing the song, but raise the question that the song implies. If it was enough, Daenu, enough. No, it was enough. Or was it enough? That tension, of course, believe it or not, the tension of what is enough and what is excessive reminds me, of course, for me, maybe not for you, of course, my grandfather, Alav Shalom, Alexander Ingber, my father's father, Ali. Ay, Ali. Ali was from Hanover, but his father was from Poland, from Tarnov. And in my grandfather's house on Fishett Street in Forest Hills, each and every Sunday, Ali Ingber was preparing a feast. Oh, wow, a feast. Polish bread and, let's say, not 3 hot dogs, not 4 hot dogs, 20 hot dogs. Not ever, of course, cooked in an oven, but boiled the way they should be, he said. And each and every time my brother Adam and I and the rest of the family would make a trek to my grandfather Ali's house, we would always leave saying, he cooked for an army. Really? And it wasn't easy just to like chalk it up to, Holocaust. They survived, they made it out. There was something about his largesse, his generosity, that didn't come from scarcity. There was something about excess that meant something to him, about more than enough. And I'd like to discuss more than enough in the context of tomorrow morning's Torah reading and offer you a teaching from one of the great Rebbes of our tradition that for me, it reframed how I think about excess. First, the verse. Tomorrow morning in Vayakel-Pekudai, tomorrow morning's Torah portion will be the end of the book of Exodus. And speaking of excess in Exodus, the last 2 portions of the Torah in that book seem to be superfluous. They are more than enough. They're a repetition of some of the very things that have to do with the tabernacle and the construction of what is known as the Mishkan, but repeated again and again. And suddenly in chapter 38 of the book of, chapter 36 of the book of Exodus, we come upon these remarkable verses. Vayomnu el Moshe lemor. They came to Moses and they said, Marbim ha'am lahavi midei avodah melacha. The people are bringing more than is needed for the tasks in the tabernacle. Vayitzab Moshe vayaviru kol b'machaneh lemor. And so Moses sent an email blast to the entire community and saying, enough. Ish v'isha al yasu od melacha l'trumat kodesh vayikalei ha'am mehavi. Enough's enough, Moshe said. And so the people heard, they stopped bringing. And then this verse 7 in chapter 36. V'hamlacha hita dayam lechol hamlacha lasot. And the work, the funds, all of the necessary resources, hayita, can you hear it? Dayam, enough, dayenu. The Torah says, it was enough. And then it adds this one little word, vehoter, and even more. It was more than enough. It was enough and it was more. Unless you think that commentaries say, you know what, fine, the Torah is just being prosaic. It was more than enough. They had more than they could possibly imagine. The commentators are troubled by this inclusion in the Torah. What is the Torah coming to tell us, and why did it have to construct a story where the people were so excited to bring that they brought more than enough? Now, by the way, just parenthetically, that would never be a problem in any fundraising or any capital campaign that would ever get off the ground at Romo. I just want you to know, we're just setting no limit on that. Bring more than enough, just parenthetically. But the vehoter, the extra word about extra, the extra word. It was more than enough. It was dayin, it was enough, but it was more. There's a great commentator known as the Or HaChaim after his work, The Light of Life. Chaim ibn Attar was one of the great mystics and masters of the Moroccan tradition. And when he came across this seeming contradiction, was it enough or more than enough? What was it, dai or hoter? Dai, hoter, extra. He reads this inclusion in the Torah as a teaching for all of us. He says, when you bring more than enough, God will make room for whatever you've brought, he says. And the truth of this teaching, he says, is that it was a miracle. It was more than enough, but then that which was extra was made room for. It grew miraculously, so that by the end it wasn't hoter, it wasn't too much. It wasn't leftover. It wasn't too much. It was just enough. The Hasidic master, Lev Yitzchak Berdichev, the great Berdichever Rabbi, quotes the Or HaChaim. He says, that's a beautiful interpretation, but here's mine, and here's where I want to go with you. He says, I have my own explanation of this extra. You know what it means, he said? He means that they brought everything that was needed for the building of the tabernacle. And then there was extra. And it isn't a contradiction, he says. It was enough to build the tabernacle in the desert. But the hoter, the extra, that excess, it was to give future generations the space to continue the work of building the Mishkan. It was he says, as if the Torah tells us with a nod towards transgenerational work. It was true, it was it was enough then in the desert. But they left over excess to give us the ability to participate in the continued building of the Mishkan. Certainly not a simple explanation for the Torah text, but a beautiful reframe. The hoter, the extra, the excess, is left over for us to do in each and every generation, acts as a framing of what it means to finish work, to deal with the generosity, as it were, or to see the unfinished work that is passed on to us, not as a burden, not as something that we begrudgingly take upon ourselves, but actually as an opportunity. It gives us accessibility. What do we do with this excess? The unfinished business that Amanda Gorman spoke about in terms of American history is not unfinished, and therefore we are angry that you didn't finish it then, but there's work left for us to participate in the building of democracy. When thinking about our ancestors and all of the things that they left undone, I know in my life I sometimes have turned to my past and said, how could you give that to me? I want to pass it back because I don't want to have to pass it on. And the reframe that the Berdichever says here is that the excess can be seen, the unfinished can be visited, can be framed as a deployment, as a partnership, as a collaboration. So that in the words of another great Hasidic master, the Meor Einayim, the great Chernobyl Rebbe, whom we've been studying each and every day, each of us in our unique way, we bring what we have to the building of the Mishkan in our lives. That is our excess ability. What do we do with what's unfinished is either a burden or a blessing. Isn't that remarkable reframing? It's a remarkable way to think about how we think about fathers, mothers, parents, sisters, brothers, people that we've met along the way. And in many ways, it mirrors the deepest teaching of the Torah, which is that God says to us, be my partner. I could have finished it on my own, but I left some over for you to finish. I made just enough for you, but then I invited everyone, like my grandfather Ali. There's got to be enough there for everyone. It's die, of course. I could have finished the world, says the Midrash. God could have just finished the world. But he said, Asher bara Elohim la'asot, in the beginning of the chapter of Genesis, in the beginning of the story of Genesis, God says, you know what? Finishing the job myself is not so much fun. I need your help. You're deployed. What's your excess ability? What are you going to make of this precious incarnation? What will you do with each and every day's work in building a world of love and goodness and compassion? And the building blocks have been left for you, and you have the skills and you have the tools. Go to work. Go to work. This, of course, in the mystical tradition of Judaism, this is the deeper meaning behind Gilgul Nishama, the transmigration of souls, what we call reincarnation. It's impossible to finish all of the work in one lifetime, says many traditions. So you get a chance to come back and keep doing it. Oh, I know, Sisyphus. Is it too much? There's a shadow to this teaching too. I wonder where it lands for you. I wonder what reframing the work that has been given to you, not as burden, but as excess, might do. How might we think about the things that we have had to carry with us throughout our lives? How might we think about the work that we have to do in our society writ large? How might we reshape and reframe the work of being a human being if we were to imagine that each generation leaves over a seat at the table with plenty of those wonderful Frankfurters prepared and says, no, we were waiting for you to add your work, to add your piece. I'm imagining meeting my great-grandfather, whose name I took, Chaim David, and saying, I wish sometimes that you had finished some of the work that you gave to my grandfather and then my father and my mother. But I also thank you. There's still work for me to do. And I will pick it up each and every time I open my eyes and see my children and step around this beautiful world and say, I'll be God's partner. Tonight at your Shabbat table or wherever you go after tonight's service, we're going to drop these two sources into your chat area and hope that you can figure out a way to download it. And I threw a couple of questions in there that emerged as I studied these sources. I'd be so curious if you would help me finish this sermon. Because I know it was it was enough, but Hoter, I'm leaving some work for all of you. Talk about it, chew on it. And maybe if you have a moment, after reflection, write me at david@romu.org what it is that you came to around your Shabbat table. The work is plenty, and it isn't upon us to finish it, but of course, we must take it up. I invite you to please rise as we take into the heart what the Torah has brought forth tonight.